Welcome back. And I've realized that if I hold the microphone closer to my mouth, it sounds a lot clearer. So don't be distracted, but here it is. And hopefully it's a lot clearer than in the last video. So, as promised, I'm going to be telling you a couple of stories. And the first one goes back way back to 1985 when I was 16 years old. I was at a school called Plum School, which is on the border between Zimbabwe and Botswana in a very arid, dry area. And the school itself was well over 100 years old, still is there. And it was a little bit of a what you would call an oasis in the middle of like what is almost a desert. And the school was at least 6 to 8 hours on a bus from where we lived in Harare. So it was a boarding school, and we were there for long periods of time and then would come back for our school holidays. And this was basically almost a military academy in ways, with the discipline and the traditions and the rules that we had to follow as little boys. But as all little boys, and I guess all over the world, we were very, very naughty, and we would get up to all manner of tricks and naughty activities. So, as I said, I was about 16 years old, and I was in what we call Form 4. And we would have a dining room, which we used to call the Grays Hall. And we would go to the Grays Hall 3 times a day. So it would be breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we would have these bench-type tables. And at the head of each table was a senior. And he was there to, in a way, to maintain order for the rest of the pupils on the table. And then sitting closer to the senior were the pupils who were probably a year younger, and then further down the table would be the younger pupils, and that was how the seniority worked. I was sitting at a table with some friends of mine. Opposite me was a person in the same form, a great guy by the name of Chris Botha, and he was in the first team water polo team. And next to me on my left was a friend, the late Dominic Bailey. At the head of the table was a guy called Pete McCrindle, who has since gone to Australia, I believe. Anyway, we became firm friends, although we were not really supposed to associate with anyone who was in a form above us. That was the rules of seniority at Plumtree School. Anyhow, we had very, very little free time at the school. Most of our time was actually in lessons and then at our daily meals. Then it would be rest, and then it would be prep, which was work. And we had to sit in silence in the prep rooms in our individual houses and work on our homework and the likes. After that, it would be sports, and then it would be into the showers and back to the Grays Hall for dinner, and then in the evening, prep again. But being young boys and ingenious and always looking for some angle, we would find ways to get up to all sorts of mischief. Now, as I said, Plumtree was a tiny little village on the border of Botswana, and there was a very small shop which was close to the school. This shop was called Costello's, and it was owned by a Greek family, and it held all sorts of wonderful things in there, sweets and treats, and also something very important to us, which was alcohol. Now, getting alcohol for us in those days was extremely difficult, and we would absolutely do anything we could to get a hold of some booze. Quite often we would go into the bush, into the rural areas around the school, and drink the homemade beer, which was called ngwebu. And it was made with maize and sorghum and all sorts of dodgy ingredients. And it was made in fertilizer sacks and drums, and it was extremely toxic, brewed over 7 days, opaque African beer. We would get extremely drunk on it sometimes on weekends, and it would have some very, very unfortunate side effects like extreme diarrhea and vomiting and general sickness. So we were having dinner one day and just chatting after our food before we had to go back to our respective houses. And we heard a rumor. The rumor was that there had been a robbery, and there had been a robbery at Costello's store, and that a large amount of alcohol had been stolen. Lots. There was no actual suspicion on who had committed the robbery. Only one thing was known, and that it was suspected that it was schoolboys who had done this robbery. There was no indication of how much booze had been stolen and what kind of booze had been stolen, only that it was a substantial amount. So this obviously triggered our enthusiasm and our imagination, and Bailey, who sat to my left, and myself set out to find this booze. So, the coming weekend, it was a Saturday, and we decided, having a free afternoon on Saturday, we would go through the school from top to bottom and do our best to try and find this booze, because if indeed it had been students from the school who had stolen it, it was very likely that it would have been stored or hidden within the school grounds. As I say, we had no idea what had been stolen, and even if it was true, but the rumor was there, and that's all we needed to fire up our enthusiasm. So on the Saturday afternoon, Bailey and myself, we set about trying to find this booze. We went to every hiding place we could conceive of. Now, there was a school hall called the Bite Hall, and it was an old building, probably 100 years old, with these wooden floors. And there was a trapdoor, and we got underneath it, and we crawled the length of this massive hall on our hands and knees in the darkness, looking for it. We were on this sandy soil in complete darkness. We had candles, and we went back and forth under this floor and found absolutely nothing. Next up, we went into the attic of the Bite Hall, and we searched all over. Still nothing at all. And from there, we went down, I think it was called Patterson Field, and we went to the squash courts, and we looked under the squash courts. Again, there was a trapdoor. Again, there was nothing. By then, of course, our disappointment was growing, and we were thinking, well, maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe this whole heist never happened. Maybe it's just a rumor, and it has no substance to it. But still, we were egged on by our enthusiasm, and we thought to ourselves, no, it has happened, and we must find it. We headed back to the main school building, and we went to a famous classroom. It was where they taught Afrikaans as a language. There was a well-known trapdoor underneath, and schoolboys over the years had dug out a depression under the school, and many would go down there and drink and smoke and hang out and do whatever little boys do. So we lifted the trapdoor and we went under the school, under the Afrikaans class, and we searched. With our candles, with our torches, there was nothing. A couple of cigarette butts, a couple of empty bottles, but absolutely nothing, nothing at all. So by then, time was going and we were pretty frustrated. And we decided that we would do a check of the school perimeter. Now, this was a massive school, huge grounds. And by then we were covered in dirt, we were exhausted, we were thirsty, and we were feeling somewhat disappointed. So we did an entire walk around the perimeter fence of the school. Now, this was a tall fence. Obviously, it was a hot spot during the war, so it was well secured. and we were in the bush getting scratched, walking over dongos and going into trees and bushes, and there was absolutely nothing. For the life of us, we could not find it at all. So it was now getting close to 5 o'clock, and it was time for us to head back to our respective houses for our showers, and then we would have to go down to the Grace Hall for dinner. So we came back past the chapel. This is a famous chapel at Plumtree School. And we were walking past the library. Now, the library was another ancient building full of wonderful antiques, full of books, and beautiful old Rhodesian architecture. At the bottom of the building, there were a few ventilation holes, and there were ceramic slats in each hole. The holes were about this big, and they were square with ceramic slats for ventilation for underneath the building. And as we walked, I noticed on the left, I said to Bailey, look at that building over there. Look at that ventilation hole there. It's broken. Shall we go and have a look? Just have a look inside. And he was like, well, maybe just one final go. But by then we were full of disappointment, and we had all but given up. So basically what we did is we went up, we crouched down on our hands and knees, and we looked into this hole. And what we saw was basically similar to when Samuel Jackson opens that suitcase on Pulp Fiction. Basically, it was just like seeing gold. It was a sight that I could never have wished or witnessed or had witnessed in my life before. What we saw in the darkness, underneath the foundations of the library, were boxes and boxes. And on the side of the boxes was written Grant's Scotch Whisky, Bell's Scotch Whisky, Smirnoff Vodka. And there were piles of these crates. It was like a revelation from heaven. It was something we could not fathom how exciting it was to see. So, we had no time. We had to go off to our shower, and we went to our respective houses, absolutely buzzing with excitement. And we had our showers, and we headed down to the Grace Hall. Now, we had to be very careful who we spoke about this to, so Bailey and I decided to include McCrindle, who was our senior at the head of the table. We did not include Botha, who was opposite us. Why? I have no idea, but we decided to keep it a little bit quiet. So we resolved that being a Saturday night, there was movie night every night at school. It was a little bit of recreation allowed for us boys. So we resolved that after the movies, we would go back to our respective houses and we would meet at midnight at the chapel. And that's when we would enter the library and go and retrieve this booze, or at least investigate it. The excitement was insane. It was just like, finding a gold mine. So off we went to the movies, buzzing with excitement. After the movies, we all went back to our houses, went to bed, lay in the darkness. Come about 11:30 at night, all of us got dressed into our tracksuits. We covered our faces with boot polish, and we sneaked out into the night. At 12 o'clock exactly, Bailey, myself, and McCrindle, we met at the chapel, which was close to the library. And we decided, right, we're going to go and find this booze. We knew it was there. We had torches, a couple of torches with us. The first obstacle was getting into the library. Now, the library was locked. We had to find a way to get in. Now, the library, being an old, ancient building, had these sash windows which you could just lift. So we managed to lift one of the windows and we climbed into the building. Now, we were aware that there were security guards walking around the school and that they could pass us at any minute. We had to be very, very careful. Not that we were doing anything to damage anything, but we weren't supposed to be there. We were being pretty naughty. So we got into the library and we searched around and we found this trapdoor. And it was by the entrance, an old ancient trapdoor. So we pried it open and we climbed down underneath the floorboards into the library, underneath the library. And we started crawling up and down. Similar to the Bite Hall, it was sandy soil, which no one had been on for 100 years. And it was a series of, I would say, corridors underneath, which were bricked off by brick walls, the foundations. But we could not find the booze. We knew the direction was in the left-hand corner, and we knew where the booze was because we had seen it through the ventilation holes. But for the life of us, we couldn't reach it from underneath. So we climbed out and we were scratching our heads thinking, what the hell? The booze is there, but how do we get to it? And we couldn't do it. So we closed the trapdoor and we walked in the library to the left-hand corner where there was a massive pile of these scales, these antique scales. They like sit in boxes and they kind of are like that. They were, used in the science labs and in the olden days before digital scales. They were like these hanging type scales, cabinet scales, I think they're called. So there was a massive pile of them there, and we thought, okay, well, the access must be from underneath these scales, but there was at least 40 of them there. So carefully, one by one, we moved the scales, because they were fragile. We moved them to the left, and what we found underneath was a trapdoor. Yep, there was a trapdoor. It had been purposely hidden by whoever had been there before. The trapdoor was underneath the scales. So this was the big moment. We lifted the trapdoor and shone our torches underneath. And there it was. It must have been 15 to 20 cases of booze. We're talking Bell's Scotch Whisky, Grant's Scotch Whisky, Smirnoff Vodka, Mainstay Cane, Bowls Brandy. The list was endless. There were boxes of quarter jacks, half jacks, and full bottles. Now, at the time, it was very difficult to get Scotch whisky in Zimbabwe, and it was seen as a luxury, extremely difficult to get. And there we were, 16-year-old boys, with boxes and boxes of it. Well, it was like Christmas Day. It was just unbelievable. So, full of excitement, the three of us began taking these boxes out one by one, and then we took them and passed them through the window. We closed the trap door, we put the scales back where they were, and then we moved these boxes behind the chapel to the perimeter fence, one by one, in a chain. When we finally got to the perimeter fence, this posed another problem. We're behind the chapel. Beyond the perimeter fence is the railway line that goes to Bulawayo from Plumtree. So we had another problem. We had to get the crates over the perimeter fence. So one of us climbed on top. There was barbed wire on the top, and another climbed over the fence. We're talking a high fence here. And we passed the boxes, the crates, up to the guy at the top and over to the other side. Once that was done, all three of us went over. Now we had moved the booze over the fence, and we had to move it up to the railway line. We had no idea where we were going to take it, but we'd got it, and we were going to take it somewhere. So this was just madness. So we got it up to the railway line in the middle of the night now, probably about 2 a.m, in the moonlight. We're moving by moonlight. So we get it onto the railway line and we walk north up towards Bulawayo, up the railway line. And we found like a dry riverbed with a bush at the bottom. And we decided, what we're going to do is we're going to hide the booze in this bush here. And, it was getting late. We needed to get back. We were tired. We were exhausted. We were filthy from being under the building. And we needed to get back because, dawn was approaching. So we back and forth moved the crates of booze down the railway line into the dried riverbed and into this bush. Unfortunately, in the bush, someone had taken a dump, a human, and a couple of us got smeared with human shit. And that was pretty unpleasant. So, yeah, that was a little bit of a bummer. But anyway, we didn't really mind about that. We would get back, have a quick shower, and go to bed. Which is exactly what we did. We left the booze there and we headed back, threw our clothes into the laundry, had a quick shower, and went to bed. Possibly only for an hour or so, but the excitement was so much that we were too excited to sleep. It was beyond exciting for us to have found this secret stash of booze. Anyway, the next day we were at breakfast and we were presented with the next problem. What the hell were we going to do with these boxes of booze that we had found and stolen and moved out of the school? What we were going to do? We came up with a plan. There was a pupil at the school. His name was Ross. I don't remember his surname, but he lived in Plumtree Village and he had the use of a Land Rover short wheelbase. And we thought, yes, this is the answer. So we contacted Ross and we said to him, look, we want to let you into our secret. We have found a shitload of booze and we want you to help us move it somewhere safe. And you can take part in it, you can benefit from it, and you can have as much booze as you want. What do you say? And he's like, yeah, I'm up for that. Let's go. So being a Sunday now, we were free. So we didn't have any sports, we didn't have to go to prep, we didn't have to do very much, and we used the opportunity to go to Ross's place in Plumtree, which is a tiny village, jump in his Land Rover, head down to the railway track, drive down the railway track and find where we had hidden the booze. He had a tarpaulin in the back of his Land Rover, and we carried the crates in the blazing sun into the back of the Land Rover, covered it with the tarpaulin, and we headed off. We drove down the Tegwani Road, which is a dirt road that heads out of Plumtree. Where it goes, it must be Tegwani, but we're talking a very, very rural road. About 10 k's down the road, we found a village. We drove into the village, an African village, and we found the elder there. He must have been in his 70s. He was an old man. We approached him and we said, listen, Sekuru, we have all of this booze. We would like to store it with you. If you will allow us to store it in your compound, in your hut, you can have as much as you want. You can drink as much as you want. Well, the old man was most welcoming and he was agreeable and he accepted our offer and we shifted the booze out of the Land Rover and into his hut, or one of his huts. Now we were on top of the world. We were super happy. We had found this booze, which was against all the odds. We had lifted it, we had moved it, and we had now found a safe place to put it. So we headed back Sunday evening, and we were very excited indeed. What we didn't realize was that at the Grays Hall, McCrindle, Bailey, and myself were all very cheerful, but our friend opposite, Chris Botha, seemed to be a bit down, and we had no reason why he was feeling a bit down, but he was not in on our secret, so we just carried on as usual. Now, the following weekend was what they called an exit weekend, meaning that the boys would be allowed to go home for 3 or 4 nights, and there would be a bus, and the bus would take them to Bulawayo or to Harare, and you would go home to your parents for 3 or 4 nights. It was what you call a midterm break. So now we are looking forward to getting home and going out with our friends with unlimited booze. What an awesome thing to do. So we went out during the week, we got our booze supplies, and we hid it at the school. And then come time for us to get on the bus, we all had it stashed away. But there was a problem. As we were due to get on the bus, the teachers and the prefects were performing searches. They were searching the boys' bags for bottles because it was well known that there were boys who had stolen this booze. What they didn't know was that it had been stolen once and then stolen again. But they knew that there would be some boys going with booze. Bailey, in his ingenuity, had a big boombox, and he removed the batteries from the boombox and placed a bottle of whiskey in where the batteries were. He then walked on the bus, and no one suspected a thing. The other two of us, we were clever enough to wait for McCrindle or Bailey to get in the bus. We walked around the side of the bus, and in the commotion, we handed the bottles of vodka, brandy, and whiskey through the window at the back of the bus, thereby smuggling it on board without being noticed. Well, after the 6 or 7 hour journey back to Harare, we were super happy, and we would all meet up and we would get thoroughly plastered on the booze. And I remember, I think we sold a couple of bottles of whiskey because, as I said, it was very difficult to get Scotch whiskey back in the day in Zimbabwe. We sold some of it to some of our parents, I believe, who were more than happy to give us a few bucks for the weekend. So that was just one of the best weekends ever, and we were overjoyed with it. So, come the end of the weekend, we all had slight hangovers. Although we were young, hangovers didn't really hit us that bad. We went and got on the bus back to school. Now, when we got to school, everything fell apart because we had told a student what we had done. His name was Damon Mesley, and his mother was the art teacher. And immediately when we arrived, we were summoned to the headmaster's office or the housemaster's office, and we were confronted with the fact that they knew what we had done. What they didn't know, and what eventually came out, was that it had been members of the first team water polo team that had gone to Costello's probably a week before and waited for a train to come past, because this was a railway town, waited for the noise of the train to come past. They had crowbarred the storeroom door of Costello's shop using the cover of the noise of the train, entered the Costello's store and removed all of this booze, and so ingeniously had hidden it under the library where no one would have thought to have found it. And then what had subsequently happened was we had found it, and we had stolen it from them. The funny thing is that Botha, the guy at the Grays Hall table who sat opposite us, was a member of the first team water polo. So that explained why he was a little bit glum whilst we were so overjoyed. So the story of the heist, that's the story of the heist, and it pretty much was the biggest trouble I think any of us got into at school. I do believe that a lot of the members of the first team water polo were expelled from the school because of that. But I guess that our heist from them was a slightly lesser crime because we didn't actually break into a shop to take it. We stole it from them. But it was probably one of the most exciting and entertaining stories I can remember from the school. And I'll never forget it. And I talk about it to this day. I even wrote about it in one of my stories. So listen, I hope you've enjoyed hearing my story. It's the first video I've done. I'm a little bit unsure of talking into a camera, and I suppose I'll get used to it after a while. So like all YouTubers say, like, subscribe, share, and all of that. Or alternatively, don't, and never come back. If you want to hear another story like this, tune in, and I'll be back with another one, probably in about a week's time. All right, have a good one, and cheers.